All right, good morning all. Thank you for joining me this morning for the South Central Texas Fall 2023 Seasonal Outlook. My name is Keith White. I'm a meteorologist and our climate services lead here at the National Weather Service, Austin, San Antonio. Today we're going to talk a little bit about this past summer. Obviously, you all know it was very hot for the second summer in a row. For many locations, it was the hottest summer on record. Very dry for central and eastern areas. The driest conditions throughout the course of the summer were to the north of Austin into Williamson County, where some locations really didn't see any measurable rain for 2 to 3 months this summer. El Nino conditions are forecast to continue. It will likely be at least a strong El Nino. This can lead to cooler and wetter than normal conditions locally, mainly in the winter months, not necessarily always in the fall. And even in the winter, there's really no guarantees. I'll show a little bit of statistics later about how this breaks down historically. Drought is likely to persist this fall. It may return in some areas currently under abnormally dry or D0 status, or even under what we jokingly refer to as D nada. Fire weather conditions, which have been pretty severe across much of the region over the course of the last several months, are starting to begin to show some signs of improvement. We're not entirely out of the woods just yet, but definitely with these cooler temperatures and rain chances, starting to see some improvement on that front. So a quick review of this summer for our 4 main climate sites of San Antonio, Austin, Camp Mabry, Austin, Bergstrom, and Del Rio. They were all significantly warmer than normal, significantly drier than normal. Of the 4, the only site that was not the warmest on record was Austin Camp Mabry, which placed second behind 2011, just barely. In terms of the number of 100-degree days, San Antonio really blew their old record out of the water. The numbers here are for just the summer months, and I didn't get a chance to update these, but for the 100-degree days. But it has been, significantly warmer than normal through much of the summer months into the early fall. And then also very, very dry, especially for areas that were not impacted by Tropical Storm Harold on August 22nd. Areas, along and east of US 281, from San Antonio eastward, seeing for many of these areas their top 10 or so driest on record, and for some of them their driest summer on record. Vast majority of South Central Texas saw their warmest summer on record, per the Precip data set. So these rainfall graphics were pulled at the end of August, showing the 90-day rainfall for the summer months. You can see, portions of Williamson County saw very little rainfall. Even the areas that saw a little bit of measurable rainfall here, most of that came in the first 10 days of June, and then really things shut off for much of our region throughout the course of the summer. You can see in this percent of normal rainfall graphic, a few areas did end the summer with above normal rains, due mainly to Tropical Storm Harold, which brought 2 to 5 and even localized higher amounts to portions of the Rio Grande Plains, the Southern Edwards Plateau. Unfortunately, that system did not bring significant rainfall to the areas that needed it most. So through the course of the summer, rainfall deficits for portions of the hill country, the I-35 corridor, and the coastal plains of more than 6 inches in many locations. And down in Lavaca County, some areas more than 8-inch rainfall deficits just over those 90 days. Looking at the rainfall data starting today, these are all percent of normal graphics looking back over the last 30, 90, 180, and 360 days. And you can see that, very dry conditions across much of the area. Last night, we did actually have a storm go through along the Williamson-Travis County border and bring, an inch to 3, or even in some locations, 3.5 or 4 inches of rain. Unfortunately, some of the other areas, much less than an inch so far. We will have some more rain chances here over the course of the next few days, hoping to continue to chip away little by little at these deficits. But if you look back over the course of the last year, many areas in the hill country extending, from Kerr and Gillespie County eastward into Comal and Hayes counties have seen over a foot rainfall deficits over the last year. In some cases, more than 16 inches And those are on top of additional deficits that date back to the early part of 2022. So for some locations, more than 2 feet less rain than they would have normally seen over the last 18 to 20 months. We'll talk a little bit more later about what that means for our drought, but I do want to change gears briefly and talk about the climatology looking forward through the rest of the fall and into the early part of the winter. So in terms of severe weather and flooding, you can see that there is a slight uptick in instances of hail here in orange, or of thunderstorm wind reports in September and October, in comparison to the winter months that we're heading into. Still, have to be concerned about flash flooding, which also ticks upwards in our region of South Central Texas from August through October. We've been so dry lately that it'll take a lot of rain to lead to any sort of significant flooding impacts in South Central Texas this fall. But certainly something to keep in mind that is one of our weather risks in the fall months is flash flooding. In terms of the 30-year average temperatures and rainfall amounts, the green bars show monthly average rainfall. So that increases in Austin from August through October. San Antonio is also pretty wet in September and October. So, we're hoping to at least see some near normal rainfall through the course of this fall to, like I said earlier, chip away at some of those long-term rainfall deficits we've seen. Temperatures finally on the downswing. After all those 100-degree days, we are pretty likely to not see any more. Not 100% guarantee. For example, the city of Austin has seen 100-degree days as late as October 2nd on the historical record. But at this point, we're starting to see that downtrend, and normal high temperatures decrease through this month from the low 90s down to about the low 80s, and then continue through the fall, minimizing in mid to late December down, at least for the city of Austin, in the 60s. In terms of the next couple of weeks, we do anticipate, after a few of these cooler days here behind this front over the next week, returning to a likelihood of above normal temperatures to round out the month of September. I've opted not to show the monthly September outlooks here because we're already halfway through the month, and clearly the above normal temperatures are likely to verify for the whole month, considering the positive temperature anomalies we've already experienced over the course of the first 2 weeks. We'll see how much rain ultimately falls this week. Chances do lean a little bit towards the potential for above normal rain during the last week of September or so. Hard to say exactly how much that could be or where that would happen, but we will take all we can get at this time. I do also want to plug that at this time next week, next Thursday, the Climate Prediction Center will be updating their monthly outlook for the month of October. So look for that on the CPC homepage next Thursday morning. So the ENSO cycle, we've had 3 long years of La Nina. That was definitely a big contributing factor to the off again, on again, mostly on drought that we've experienced since 2020. We are already firmly entrenched in El Nino, but we do not really have a whole lot of local impacts from El Nino this time of year. Especially in the summertime, the jet stream is way off to our north. We don't typically, have too many local impacts. However, those do start to ramp up late in the fall and then especially in winter. And clearly El Nino is here to stay through the winter months, and will likely continue into spring as well, with an over 80% chance in the March, April, May timeframe. Technically, we're already in a moderate El Nino event. Sea surface temperature anomalies in the Eastern Pacific are already more than 1 degree Celsius above normal. That's the cutoff for a moderate El Nino. 1.5 degrees Celsius is the cutoff for a strong El Nino. And what they call a super Nino would be if we get above this 2 degrees Celsius anomaly for sea surface temperatures in the tropical Eastern Pacific. And on the next slide here, they've just produced, these were just released this morning, the latest probabilities of these strengths. So through the course of the fall and winter, almost guaranteed that we're going to remain in this at least moderate strength El Nino. And it's very likely that it will continue to strengthen into a strong El Nino. They don't produce probabilities for super Nino or greater than 2 degrees Celsius anomalies, but it's certainly within the realm of possibility over the course of the fall and the winter months. So this is a generalized graphic showing the positioning of the jet stream on average during an El Nino winter. So once we get into sort of late November, December, January, February, the jet stream preferentially spends more time over our region. Now, it's our higher higher variability season, so it will waver north, waver south. We will have cold periods, we will have warmer periods, unlike the summer where it was just hot, hot, hot every day, every single day. We will have cooler periods, we will have warmer periods, but on average, we do typically see cooler and wetter than normal conditions here in South Central Texas in the wintertime. Not a sure bet though. So I used a tool called the Local Climate Analysis tool to make these graphics. And this is data averaged over the NCEI climate division that covers Austin and San Antonio and then southeastwards towards the coast. But this data is pretty similar for the other regions that include our 33 counties. And so you can see that during El Nino, average rainfall is definitely pushed up a little higher than during a La Nina or neutral conditions. And this is just for the September to November period in these graphics. But there are still some pretty dry falls in El Nino years. This line here is essentially the 10th percentile. So 10% of all El Nino years could have rainfall on average less than 7 inches. 10% of all El Ninos could have rainfall over 17 inches on average in this region. Although most of them are within this, their 75th percentile to 25th percentile box, which runs about 10 to maybe, about 13 inches in that region. Obviously, on average, less rainfall will fall to areas to the west, closer to the Rio Grande, where there's for an entire year about half the amount of rain that locations along US 77 see. But there's certainly that lean towards wetter than normal conditions. This other chart here on the right is sort of a breakdown of we call them terciles. So the area here in brown is the number of years that have fallen in the driest third of all years during El Nino. So only about 12.5% of El Nino years end up drier than normal in this region. About 42% are near normal precipitation wise, and then about 46% end up with above normal precipitation. So certainly crossing our fingers that that those statistics hold this year and that we see continued above normal rainfall. Can't say that with any certainty at this time, especially for the fall months. In terms of temperatures, you can see in the box plot here again, the average temperatures are cooler in the September through November period than during a neutral year or a La Nina year, but there's a lot of variability here. The 10th to 90th percentile stretch over a pretty large range. So, there are still a significant amount of warmer than normal falls here in South Central Texas during El Nino. And the bar chart here shows that about 29% of our El Nino winters do still end up warmer than normal. This graph shows a few of our El Nino years over the past few decades, kind of broken out for the rainfall they produce over the fall and winter at San Antonio. Our state climatologist, John Nielsen Gammon, shared this a couple of weeks ago, and I thought it would be interesting to show that not every El Nino looks the same. Even the ones that do end up wetter than normal, which in this case was all of them except for 97, 98, looking all the way through the spring months. Some of them you see a lot of rain in September and October. In others, those months are pretty dry, and the rain really picks up later in the fall or into the winter. And again, there are some years where the rainfall amounts end up being near or even below normal from time to time. So it remains to be seen exactly what will happen, but our hope is that those odds that lean towards wetter than normal conditions will start to rear their heads over the course of the next few months. So this graphic is a multi-model ensemble of precipitation anomalies. And you can see in South Central Texas, there isn't really expected to be much. There are some individual models in this ensemble that do show the potential for above normal precipitation. And I'll point out that this graphic is for October, November, and December specifically. That's what the OND stands for. But when you average things out, the expectation is that in model land, near normal precipitation is a pretty decent likelihood. However, there is more agreement in above normal temperatures, at least through October, November, and December. Multi-model ensemble average, anomalies of anywhere from 0.5 to a little over 1 degree Celsius over South Central Texas. And that's reflected in the outlooks here from the Climate Prediction Center. Now, this 3-month outlook was for the period beginning 2 weeks ago on September 1st and lasting through the end of November. They do have these over running 3-month periods on their website, so they're available for October, November, December, November, December, January, etc. And those will be updated along with the October monthly outlook next Thursday. So I do encourage you all to go take a peek when those are issued. But at least for now, we do anticipate that on average, there's a pretty decent chance, about a 40 to 50% chance for above normal temperatures to continue on average through the end of November. And again, there will be cooler than normal periods this fall, unlike in the summer. But considering what we've seen already, looking at leaning towards continued warmer than normal temperatures. There's not a clear signal though for precipitation. There are equal chances, 33% each, of below, near, or above normal precipitation from September to November. Again, fingers crossed we start to get more towards that above normal amount, but we can't make any promises of that at this time. But we will continue to take all we can get. So in terms of the drought, the latest monitor issued this morning does have a pretty dire depiction over most of the central and eastern portions of our region, with 43% of our area currently in the most exceptional D4 drought. And with the exception of the areas along the Rio Grande that saw some decent rains from TS Herald, most of the rest of the region is in some form of drought. Now, we do expect to see some minor improvements with the rain that we've already seen today and yesterday, and then what may be coming. But like I talked about earlier, those short and long-term deficits remain pretty high. So we don't anticipate any removal of drought over the next few months. There could be some improvements in some areas, but the drought outlook through the end of November persists with that drought. Depending on what happens later this fall, if we get through this temporary wet period and things really start to dry out again, I wouldn't rule out the possibility of some minor drought, moderate to severe even by the end of this fall, returning in some of these portions along the Rio Grande. But for now, they've had a decent amount of rainfall, and I don't anticipate there being any drought impacts in that region other than the longer term impacts of some lower reservoir levels, say on Lake Amistad. In terms of fire weather, this graphic here is called the Keach-Byram Drought Index, which is sort of a measure of moisture deficiency. It's still sort of at the top of the charts over much of the central and eastern portions of our 33 county area. Although with the rains that we have seen and are expected to see, we'll start to see some improvements in this area. But it'll take a while for those dry trees, grasses, shrubs to really increase their level of moisture. So in terms of the fire weather that we expect, we're in a lull now. We're not expecting the kind of wildland fire potential that we've seen over the course of, say, late July through the month of August and into early September. But looking at the energy release component over 4 of the regions that cover our area, you can already see some improvement in the black line here from what was near and even above record values in many of these regions to at least closer to the normal, which is these gray lines. And the forecast values in green show continued improvement in that area, with the rains and cooler temperatures that we're expecting. So once we get through this wet period, we can't rule out a return to some, elevated to near critical fire weather days, especially in any areas that aren't lucky enough to pick up significant rainfall amounts over the course of the next few days. But at least for now, heading in the right direction in this area. This is the kind of thing we were really hoping to see, and we are happy to see it. This just shows those regions that those 4 graphics were for. So they technically reach outside of the boundaries of our coverage area, but are pretty representative of the conditions that we've seen. More improvement out here along the Rio Grande, a little bit less improvement in the areas that have been much drier, but we'll continue to see those improve. And I'll show this, but say that these outlooks were issued on September 1st and were really meant for the entire month. At this point, we're seeing improvement, and I don't anticipate that we would see this October map change when it's reissued on October 1st. I think we'll probably stay in the near normal category for significant wildland fire potential in South Central Texas. And lastly, briefly, I want to touch on tropics. Back in August, the outlook was updated from the expectation for a likelihood of a near normal season to a likelihood of an above normal season for the Atlantic Basin as a whole. And so far, that has panned out. There have been a lot of tropical systems developing in the Atlantic Basin. Hurricane Lee ongoing right now. In terms of impacts to Texas, though, over the course of the next few weeks, we'll still need to keep a close eye on things. But as we get into October, and especially into the second half of October, tropical activity is exceedingly rare in our region as we start to get more and more and stronger cold fronts pushing through Texas and into the Gulf and helping to steer anything that may develop away from our region. But still something to think about, at least for the next few weeks. Nothing immediate on the horizon to watch for, but you can't completely rule anything out just yet. And so I'll wrap it up with a look at our expectations for any significant weather. We don't expect in the near term too much in the way of significant impacts from heavy rain or flash flooding. We do have at least a small chance for some localized flooding with the rains today and tomorrow, but after that, things will kind of clear out. Our antecedent conditions on our rivers, very dry, many of them not really running at all. So it would take a lot of rainfall to lead to any sort of river flooding. But if we do end up seeing wetter conditions through the course of this season, there is that potential for us to see increasing risk of heavy rain and flash flooding. Historically, South Central Texas has seen some big floods in El Nino falls. Many of you will remember 2015, for example, October of 2015. We can't say that an event like that will or won't happen, but it's something to keep in mind that as a possibility in these kinds of conditions. And a lot of people are so accustomed to the dryness that we've had, especially people who've moved to the region over the course of the last few years, that this is another thing to keep in the back of your mind that you may need to prepare for flooding impacts later this year. Again, at this time, nothing significant in the foreseeable future, though. In terms of fire weather, sort of near normal wildland fire potential, and then tropical weather for us locally, near to slightly below normal, no significant systems on the foreseeable horizon, and we're sort of waning on our local season. And then in terms of drought, obviously there's a lot of impacts from drought in the area now. Those aren't going away anytime soon. Our reservoirs are very low, many of them, including Canyon Lake, at their lowest level on record. And so it would take quite a bit of rainfall to fill those up. However, we are optimistic that there's at least a chance for some of those shorter term drought impacts to begin to abate at least later this fall as we continue through our secondary wet season. So with that, thank you for your patience today and being with me. I will take any questions through the questions box here in the GoToWebinar panel. Otherwise, you all have a great day, and I will be sending out a recording of this webinar as well as the slides to everybody who received an invitation sometime, ideally today, but potentially it may take me an extra day or two to get those out. So please be patient with me.